When you were young, did people say you were too quiet or too sensitive? Weird? Maybe you were too deep for your age, but not deep in a way anyone could see. You felt things before they happened, carried other people's moods in your body like secondhand smoke in your lungs. You were 6 years old and already drowning in feelings no one gave you words for. Maybe you grew up in a time when different meant difficult, where adults called you dramatic or shy or stubborn, not intuitive or easily overwhelmed, never gifted in ways that didn't fit the chart on a classroom wall. We didn't have the language for trauma. We didn't have the language for neurodivergence. We barely had the language for feelings unless they were anger or shame. I grew up in the 70s in a house that felt like a storm. My mother's rage could shift the weather, and I learned early how to read her like a barometer, how to fawn, how to disappear, how to shapeshift into the version of me that kept the yelling and abuse at bay. My father, he was there, but not. Passive, ghost-like, more like an older sibling than a parent. He didn't protect me, and I don't remember anyone else intervening or helping. There was violence, narcissism, gaslighting, codependency. There were 3 of us kids, my brother, me, and my dad. I think I was born anxious. As a child, I had panic attacks over death, over car accidents I hadn't seen, over things people talked about too casually, as if tragedy wasn't the most sacred, terrifying thing in the world. And the world didn't feel safe. My house didn't feel safe. My body didn't feel safe. And somehow I thought it was my job to fix the atmosphere. If I could be good enough, quiet enough, helpful enough, emotionally responsible enough, maybe my mother wouldn't explode. I didn't understand that was fawning. I thought it was love and devotion. And still, I felt very different. Like I was walking around with some strange invisible texture that made people step away or mock me or forget I was there. I didn't have many friends, and I didn't know why. As a teenager on the outside, I was good, quiet, polite, careful. I smiled when I was supposed to, but inside I was unraveling. My body became the only place I had any say, and I learned that eating less made the noise quieter. That hunger gave me something to hold on to. It started as control, and maybe it turned into vanishing, a way to carve away the parts of me that felt too loud or too much or too wrong. And I battled this for years, the hunger and the pain that went with it, the aching need to disappear just enough to finally feel safe. It's strange for me to look back at the 70s now, to think about how different the world was, especially for people like me. Before the internet, there was so much about the way we lived that made us feel like we didn't belong, and back then there was no language for it, no understanding that the feeling of being different wasn't because we were weird or bad or defective. Maybe it was simply because we were neurodivergent, but I had never heard that term. The word anxiety was barely acknowledged, let alone understood in the way we know it today, and depression was something to be ashamed of. We were just lost, and no one seemed to know why. Growing up during that time, I felt like I was always on the outside. I didn't know I was an INFJ, I didn't know I was a highly sensitive person, and certainly no one around me could put a name to the overwhelming feelings I was constantly experiencing. There was no recognition of neurodivergence that I remember, no understanding of what it meant to be someone who was deeply sensitive to the world around them, and there was no one telling me that my way of thinking, feeling, and being in this world wasn't wrong. It was just different. We didn't have words for things back then, like no one talked about anxiety in the way it's discussed today. I just thought I was overly sensitive and weak. I remember feeling like I couldn't handle life, as if I was broken or incapable of coping with the world. My thoughts would race, my emotions would swell, and I couldn't find a way to escape from it. It felt like being trapped in my own head and drowning in a sea of overthinking, and no one around me had any clue. I was too quiet or too serious for my age, and every attempt I made to fit in only served to remind me that I didn't belong. The truth was, I did not have the tools to understand what was happening to me. I was raised in a world that didn't have a place for people like me, really. My thoughts were too intense, my feelings were too deep. The few times I told people how I felt, I would be met with, "You shouldn't feel that way." The way I experienced life was too overwhelming. No one knew how to help me, and I didn't know how to ask for help. How could I explain that the world didn't make sense to me? How could I tell anyone that I didn't feel like I was a part of it, that I was constantly on the outside looking in? At the time, it felt like I was just broken, defective in some way that I couldn't even put into words. I didn't have the language to explain that my mind was always racing, that I felt everything deeply, that I saw the world in shades that others just didn't even seem to notice. In fact, I thought I was the only one who saw it this way. I thought everyone else had it figured out and that I was somehow failing. I felt like I was missing a piece of the puzzle, and every time I tried to fit in or make sense of things, the pieces just wouldn't align. It wasn't until much later in life that I learned that the piece I was missing wasn't a flaw. It was simply understanding that my mind works differently. There was no room for this kind of sensitivity back then. The world didn't have a place for someone who could feel so deeply, who could hear the unspoken words between people, or who could feel the weight of every single interaction. Instead of being understood, we were told to toughen up, to stop being so sensitive, to be more like everybody else. But how could I? I wasn't like everybody else, and that became painfully clear every single day, and no one was there to reassure me that it was okay to be different, that there was nothing wrong with me. Instead, I was just made to feel like I was too much emotion, thought, too quiet, too much introspection, and just too much. And then let's talk about the loneliness, that crushing loneliness. It was my constant companion. I couldn't make sense of it as a child, but now I realize it was the loneliness that comes from not fitting in and not understanding why. I wanted to be understood, to find someone who could see me for who I was, but I was surrounded by people who didn't seem to understand their own feelings, let alone mine, or have time for them. And so I stayed quiet. I stayed in my own world, hoping that somehow, someday, things would make sense, but they didn't. The isolation I felt was profound, and no one was there to talk about it. There was no one who could say, "You're not alone," or "I see you." I was left to wonder if everyone else felt this way, or if I was the only one carrying this burden of quiet and unseen pain. I think a lot of the struggle came from not having anyone to explain to me what was happening in my head. I was anxious, but I didn't even know what that was. I was overwhelmed, but I didn't have the vocabulary to describe it. I didn't know that being an INFJ meant that I was always absorbing the emotions of others and picking up on things that were unspoken, trying to understand the deeper meaning behind every conversation. And I didn't know that being a highly sensitive person meant that I could feel things more deeply than most people could, that I could pick up on the smallest nuances of energy and atmosphere. It wasn't just that I was sensitive, it was that the world felt like sensory overload. It was like trying to live in a house full of constant noise and flashing lights when all you wanted was a quiet corner to breathe. But back then, none of that seemed to make sense. I thought I was the odd one out, the one who just couldn't keep up. I thought my mind was somehow broken because it didn't function like everyone else's. And as I grew older, that feeling of being different only intensified. It was as if there was a fundamental misunderstanding between me and the rest of the world, and I didn't have the words to bridge the gap. And the sad part was that I wasn't alone in feeling this way. There were countless other kids and teens and adults who felt the same, but didn't know how to express it. We were all part of this generation that didn't have any tools to understand our own struggles. We didn't have the language to explain our emotions, our sensitivities and anxieties. So we bottled it up, and we hid it, and we tried to make ourselves fit into a world that wasn't designed for us. Looking back, I really wish I'd known that I wasn't broken and that I wasn't weird or defective, but simply someone who needed to understand their own mind. I wish I had known that being sensitive wasn't something to hide or suppress. It was a strength. That overthinking wasn't a weakness. It was just my mind working in ways that other people didn't understand. But I didn't know that at the time, and that's why I felt so lost. Now I realize that we were a lost generation, not because we were incapable, but because we didn't have the tools to understand ourselves. We were a generation of misunderstood souls, struggling with things we couldn't name. We were the people who felt everything too much, deeply, and couldn't figure out why the world didn't make sense to us. So we grew up before the words existed. Before trauma meant more than bruises, before anxiety was more than a character flaw, before neurodivergent meant something other than odd or space cadet. We were expected to be quiet, obedient, not ask questions, not cry too loud, not feel too much. Some of us had mothers who were ticking time bombs and fathers who hid in the garage. Some of us had teachers who labeled us lazy when we were actually dissociating. We were called weird, moody, intense. We were told to smile more, told to stop being so dramatic, told to stop daydreaming. We became master performers, masters of masking, of holding it together when we were quietly falling apart, of studying the room before speaking, of saying what people wanted to hear so they wouldn't get uncomfortable with our real thoughts. And we didn't have safe adults to mirror us, and no language for nervous system dysregulation. No books for kids who knew when someone was lying but didn't know how to say so. And so we internalized it. We made our weirdness into shame. We made our sensitivity into failure. We made our emotional intuition into something to hide. But here's the thing, we were never broken. We were just trying to decode a world that didn't speak our language. We were using emotional sonar before anyone told us we had permission. We were noticing patterns in people, in words, in silence, and thinking we were paranoid when really we were just being perceptive. We didn't need to be fixed. We needed to be understood. And some of us are starting to understand ourselves now. Maybe a little late, but it's never too late. Maybe after the damage was done, but still, we are finding the words. Some of us are INF personalities. Some of us are autistic or have ADHD. Some of us are deeply anxious or complexly traumatized. Some of us still don't know what box we fit in, and maybe we never will. But we know how it feels to grow up without a map, to think we were lost when really we were just walking a path no one else could see yet. But now, with time and understanding, we can finally begin to piece it together. We can finally see that our sensitivities and anxieties, our deep introspection are all part of who we are, and they're not things to fix or suppress. They're things to embrace and understand. And they grew in the cracks of everything we tried to hide, blooming anyway, and that gives me hope.